but we have to protect our borders. And for one European MEP last week to say that the word protecting your borders was a nasty, horrible thing to say, or that sovereignty was a horrible thing to say, they're the people who are representing you in Europe. They're representing you over there. So we voted for somebody to go to Europe to represent Ireland who doesn't think our borders are important, who doesn't think our sovereignty is important. It's important with 75% roughly of the legislation that we're putting in this country comes from Europe or comes from European directives. It's really important that we stay in control of that legislation as much as we possibly can. Remember, of course, the European Union was originally the European Economic Common Market, where countries came together to help each other. That was the whole idea. They came together to help each other. Now at the moment it's turned into a dictatorship. Right. So we're being told what we can and can't do. We've already lost a lot of our sovereignty. We've already lost a lot of the laws that we have in this country that we have control over. We can't afford to lose any more. We just can't. And that's why we need strong people. We need people with a voice. We need people who are not afraid to speak. We need people who are not afraid just to say no in Europe, particularly when it comes to climate policy, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to housing, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to agriculture, the agriculture sector, which is being destroyed by Europe at the moment. When it comes to all those things, we need strong people across Europe. And I think this is the year to do it, because if we look across Europe at the moment, we can see a massive change. It's starting to swing. I don't want it to swing to the extreme right. That's not what we want in society, because we've seen where that goes sometimes too. But we want it to move back to the centre again. That's what we need. It's been too left, too far. And the only main promise I can make to you is I won't let you down. I will never let you down. Anything you want me to do, I will try my best to do it. I've never let anybody down in my life. I worked in the nightclub industry and I went to work in 3 foot of snow just to make sure I was there, even though no customers turned up. I will always turn up. I will always do my job diligently. I will never take time off sick, unfortunately, touch wood, because thankfully I haven't been sick recently, but I've never taken time off. I will work really hard to make sure that you're represented. It's not me, it's that you're represented. I've represented people for 30 years. At one stage I was doing 2 shows a day on the same radio station, which was 5 hours talking every single day. But I don't mind doing it because I'm representing people. And I love listening to people. I love talking to people. I love knowing how they feel. And I love knowing how we can help them. But unfortunately, the people in the building across the road, with the exception of a few, like Michael Collins in Independent Ireland, and 1 or 2 other politicians, don't care about how you feel. We've seen that in the recent referendum. They don't actually care. Do they really for 1 minute believe that the people of Ireland wanted to remove the word mother and woman from the Constitution? The only people that did was the NGOs that the government are funding every year. And that's another thing we need to deal with. There are very many good... Over 36,000 NGOs in this country. A lot of them do a really good job. They're there and they serve a really good purpose. There's a lot of small football clubs, GAA clubs, other NGOs that are out there, funded organisations that are out there, and they do really well and do really good work. Make-A-Wish, all those other organisations that might get some level of government funding. But in saying that, there are a lot of NGOs out there that don't represent you. And the typical example of that, of course, is in the last referendum with the Women's Council of Ireland. They didn't represent the women of Ireland at all, because they asked for a yes vote. They asked you to vote yes to remove the word mother and woman from the Constitution. That doesn't even seem right when you actually say it, when you say it back to yourself. And they are funded by the state. And there are many other NGOs funded by the state. And it all needs to be examined, because 6 billion of your tax money is going every year in NGOs. And I know Independent Ireland will be tackling that, the overspending in this country, the ridiculous overspending in this country on many different issues. So all I'll say is, I will be the voice of Dublin in Europe, because I feel I'm a good voice and I want to represent you, not me. So please vote for me on the 7th of June, and I really appreciate it.
How would you respond to the criticism of Gael TD Ciaran Cannon, who said on Twitter earlier that your message was divisive, and he specifically posted a clip from your show where you were saying effectively that while American politics isn't perfect and they have problems with their political system, at least you know you can vote for one side or the other. There's Republicans and Democrats, and there's a clear delineation between them.
And if you look at American politics, for example, you have the Democrats and Republicans, and people can pick a side. You know what I mean? Now, it's not, the American politics system is not perfect. I'm not suggesting it is, but you can pick a side.
And he said that this was divisive and an attempt to import a divisive, polarising message to Ireland, what would your response be to Gael Cannon?
My first response would be, I think the most divisive people in this country currently at the moment are our own government, because they're dividing people by suggesting that anybody who doesn't listen to their narrative is either a racist or far right or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't matter what the issue happens to be. But that was in relation to what, if we put that into context, the clip that he cut was really unfair because it was a longer conversation. And what I was talking about, when I was a young man, my father was a Fianna Fáil man at the time. And at that particular time, Fianna Fáil would have been considered a conservative party. So they were very different to Fine Gael or Labour. And of course, you had the Progressive Democrats as well come along. But I said, at that time, you had different parties that represented different things. So you had a choice. At least you could say, well, okay, I'm a bit more conservative, I'll vote for Fianna Fáil. Or I'm a bit, I want to go for the workers, I'll go for Labour. At the time, that was the way it was, the Workers' Party. But now, we're not seeing that anymore. What we're seeing is all the government parties, all on the left. So people who have different family values, different morals, who want to encourage the family in this country, they don't have representation anymore. Well, they do in independent Ireland now.
Yes.
So we need representation. And what I was talking about was, I made an example that I did clearly state I didn't believe American politics was perfect, but what you have is the Democrats and the Republicans. So you can pick a side. It's not that it's divisive, but everybody has different views in life. It doesn't mean you all have to fight with each other about it, but we're entitled to have different views. And it's really important in politics that you have the left and you have the right, because the left will make laws that are very progressive, and it's up to the right to go, well, hold on, maybe not ready for that yet. Can we just pull back a little bit? And they go, oh, well, okay. And that's what's really important in society, that we move forward. We have to evolve as a society. Nobody denies that. We change our laws. We move forward all the time. Things that we didn't think weren't a good idea 10 years ago might be a good idea now. But it's up to parties to slow it down constantly all the time. So the right will slow down the left will sometimes slow down the right, depending on who has more power. So that's the way it has to work in politics. So the idea that he would even say that, the man clearly didn't listen to what I had to say. He took it completely out of context. He didn't have his listening ears on. And after all, he is Fine Gael.
Also, Ben, from a campaign point of view, we take it as hugely encouraging that a Fine Gael TD would take the time to extrapolate an 8-second soundbite and post it on his Twitter today. If I was his campaign manager, I'd be advising him to get on the doors instead of doing nonsense like that.
I'll give him a hug if he needs it.
What would you say to somebody who might argue that Europe is sort of a waste of time, in the sense that Ireland elects so few MEPs relative to the size of the European Parliament, that our voice is so diluted that whether we elect brilliant candidates or awful candidates, or it's almost sort of irrelevant, and that the Independent Ireland Party's efforts might be better directed towards more domestic elections?
No, I get what you're saying. And we are a small country and we do have small representation. But if every single country thought like that, well, then we wouldn't have representation at all. So I think it's really important. It's like the argument, for example, climate change people give, when they say, well, what's the point in killing all the cows in Ireland? Sure, aren't they going to do it in Brazil anyway? So we make no impact. So, and they'll argue against that. So I'm arguing that even if it's only a small representation, and it is in the big scheme of things in Europe, in the European Parliament, it does make a difference. Because other countries, if they all felt the same way, we wouldn't have a good European Parliament. We wouldn't have a vote. I mean, votes are not always a landslide. I mentioned again, I hate to keep coming back to the European Migration Pact. It wasn't a landslide vote. There was only about 30 votes in the difference. And those 30 votes, a lot of those could be Irish. Because we want to protect our borders, we want to protect our sovereignty, we want to protect our country. If other countries feel the same way, which they do, they would vote as well. That could save 30 votes. That could stop it from going through. So I think every bit counts, and I think it's really important. We may not have the biggest representation in Europe, certainly not, but I think we still have representation. I think it's really important.
And very lastly then, on the European Migration Pact, the Justice Minister, McEntee, was saying in the Dáil last night that the Irish people did vote for the EU Migration Pact, in the sense that they voted for the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, and she said that was effectively us giving permission to the government to sign up to such things, and so the public have their stamp of approval on this effectively.
Do you think the Irish people signed up to having hundreds of people sitting in tents in inhumane conditions along Mount Street? I don't think so. We never signed up for that. We signed up for a fair immigration policy with the Lisbon Treaty. And the Lisbon Treaty allows us to have a fair immigration policy. What we have at the moment is reckless, completely and utterly reckless. And it's been led by a government and by a Minister for Justice who seems completely out of touch.
Which party do you think is kind of disappointed, or not the use word trade, but kind of let down the electorate?
Sinn Féin. I think Sinn Féin had a really good opportunity going back 5 years ago because people voted for them. Even though they may not have liked them, they voted for them because they wanted a party of change. We're still in that same position now. But I think Sinn Féin turned their back on people, particularly when we've seen in the referendum, and they're the party of U-turns. The other party that shouldn't even be allowed near the Dáil is the Green Party. You know, they're an opposition party that didn't oppose. You know what I mean? They're meant to be an opposition party. And if you go back in time, opposition parties did their job. You know, they stood up constantly in the Dáil and opposed the government. Sinn Féin stayed very quiet for 2 or 3 years and only recently then came out with the referendum. Of course, they voted for the hate speech bill, which you're all familiar with. They then denied they voted for it, even though they did, which is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in the history of politics in this country. We didn't vote for it. You kind of did, every single one of you. You know, it's quite bizarre to see how they're doing a U-turn because they're terrified now. Because what they did was, Sinn Féin's voters were always the working class people. You know, they were the people that Sinn Féin are supposed to care about. But those people realised they don't actually care about us at all because they're voting for all the stuff that we didn't want. And now Sinn Féin all of a sudden are going, there's an election around the corner, we better pretend we do care. And that's exactly what they're doing at the moment. But it's too late, people saw through it.
What would you say to the kind of criticisms of, for example, I mentioned it to Niall earlier, the fact that Fine Gael TD Ciaran Cannon was saying that there's a divisive message about independent Ireland, that they're bringing a kind of the establishment versus the people, and that this could create a kind of a social division. What would you say to that criticism from the government?
Ciaran Cannon and his government colleagues are running absolutely terrified. Because I know what's happening here. There's a revolution in Irish politics. The people have got up and the people have said enough is enough. We're sick of politicians, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, Social Democrats, Labour, the whole sing-song. They actually should be formed as one party and let them become a decent opposition like Independent Ireland and one or two other inside there. Because that's what the people of Ireland are calling for. They're absolutely fed up to the teeth of being accused of being far left, far right, extreme right, and this right, because they have a view. I have a view. Fergus here has a view, but it might be different to my views, but we very much are aligned on the main issues. And the main issues we're aligned on is common sense. And I can tell you that's what's lacking in this country. And the people of Ireland, and we saw it with the referendum, where 70% of the people said, we're not aligned at all to Sinn Féin. We're not aligned anymore to Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. We're actually aligned. It's totally different, and they're not even talking on our behalf. You can see with hate speech, Sinn Féin and others are all jumping scared now. They're all jumping off a ship that they were on board. That ship is sinking. And Independent Ireland is staying afloat. And we're offering the people, whether it is Dublin, as I said, whether it is Galway, whether it is Roscommon, or whether it is Bantry, and anywhere else, because all these people behind me would like to mention their own areas, we are going to be representing those people with common sense candidates. Both female and male candidates are going to work hard, whether it is urban or rural Ireland, they are going to work for their people.